The Revenue Minister says her proposals to clamp down on multinational tax avoidance can achieve the same or better results as introducing a diverted profits tax. Now, that is now before Parliament in Australia. We'll look at that next week and what exactly it does. But Judith Collins today unveiled proposals aimed at big multinational corporates who are legally, and that's important, getting away with not paying an estimated $300 million a year in tax in New Zealand. We heard from the OECD before, base erosion and profit shifting. In short, what you do is you declare your profits in low tax territories and you move your costs to high tax territories. It is legal, but the loopholes that allow it to happen are being closed. I spoke to the Minister and asked her exactly what she's looking at tightening up on.
Where we've got international companies or multinational companies who are trading in New Zealand and where they have been perhaps charging too much to their New Zealand operations so that their profit in New Zealand is much lower than one would expect otherwise, where that's basically a transfer pricing, where they're charging too much interest on loans to those New Zealand operations. These are the sorts of things that we're going to go after. Now, that means that their profit is much lower than it should be in New Zealand. They don't pay as much tax as they should be, and they divert the profit off to overseas other countries where there's a much lower tax rate. So basically, it's thwarting the system. So we're putting in some measures to deal with that, and we're giving Inland Revenue very substantial powers when they don't get cooperation from some of these multinational companies for Inland Revenue to assess the tax and for the companies to have to prove that it's not right. So that's a big change, that one, and it is necessary when you're dealing with multinational.
Yeah, can I use the example of Apple, who, and I'm using the financial year ended 27 September 2014, their revenue in New Zealand was $568 million. Their cost of sales, though, was $551 million. It's very, very difficult. In fact, it's been impossible to get Apple to tell us what the cost of sales were, why it's so very high. In fact, about 96% of their revenue. How will this new measure address that kind of carry-on?
Well, that's the sort of example, and of course I don't want to deal with any individual examples, but if there was something like that where Inland Revenue might suspect that there is some we could say jiggery-pokery, frankly, going on around moving the cost of business onto New Zealand operations, then Inland Revenue will be asking those questions.
So, in fact, Inland Revenue will be able to go into whatever company we're talking about, and let's just be hypothetical here and say, show us what those costs are. Are they true New Zealand costs?
Correct, and they also will be putting in some measures around limiting the amount of interest that's charged and limiting the true costs, or the costs that are being passed on. So they will be able to look behind the veneer of the invoice.
Which is consistent with what the OECD is trying to work on right across the G20, and I know that New Zealand has been active in those talks. So this is the kind of prescription that the OECD is hoping will end base erosion and profit shifting across the board.
Yes, and by working with the OECD and their multilateral approach, it actually gives New Zealand, a little country that is significantly smaller than some of the companies that we're talking about, some ability to actually make things happen, because we will be working with other countries and making sure our double tax agreements are all changed at the same time to make sure that we can do these sorts of things. So we couldn't do everything just by ourselves. That would be ridiculous, but we can work with others on it.
Why has it taken until now to do this? Because it's been apparent and it's been discussed and it's been very much on the record for a year or two now that this sort of thing was going on. And New Zealand has been in what I understand are constructive talks with the OECD about a participation in this kind of thing. Why is it only happening now?
Well, I can't tell you exactly why it's happening now, but I can say that there's a huge workload that Inland Revenue has around the policy changes that it's making. But, we're signing up. We expect to sign up to this multilateral agreement in June this year. So you can see it takes a long time. You're dealing across countries. But also, we want to make sure that we didn't go rushing in, do something that's actually just going to say to multinational, just don't come here. We're happy to have them here. We just want them to pay their fair share of tax.
What do you think this will be worth to New Zealand each year?
Well, I think that's a great question, isn't it? Inland Revenue believe it will be, with these measures that we've talked about, around about close to about 300 million a year. It could well, as they say to me, they don't know what they don't know, but it could be more, it could be less. But I think anything around that $200 to $300 million a year is a substantial amount of money, makes a big impact into our budget.
Judith Collins, Revenue Minister.